"Sir, we don't serve people like you here." The sentence didn't come out loud, but it landed heavy, polished, practiced, wrapped in a smile that never reached the eyes. Marcus Reed paused just inside the doorway, one hand still resting against the brushed steel handle, the cool metal pressing into his palm like a quiet reminder that he had already crossed the threshold. The restaurant smelled exactly the way he remembered: seared butter, rosemary, something citrus drifting faintly beneath the hum of low conversation and clinking glassware. Warm lights spilled across polished wood tables, casting soft reflections that made everything look richer than it really was. He stood there for half a second longer than most people would, not confused, not hesitant, just observing. The hostess behind the stand straightened slightly, her posture shifting from casual to calculated as her eyes scanned him from shoes to shoulders, measuring, categorizing, deciding. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her voice smooth but tight, like it had already made up its mind before the question finished forming. Marcus glanced past her. Empty tables. At least 6 within clear view, set with folded linen napkins and untouched glassware that caught the light like still water. He nodded once, slow, thoughtful, as if confirming something to himself rather than answering her. "I don't," he said calmly. His voice was even, grounded, the kind of tone that didn't ask for permission to exist in a room. The hostess gave a sympathetic tilt of her head that didn't feel sympathetic at all. "We're fully booked tonight." The words came quickly, almost rehearsed, as though they'd been used before, many times. Marcus's eyes moved again, not rushed, not confrontational, just precise. A couple near the window laughed softly, their plates barely touched. A man in a navy blazer checked his watch. 2 seats at the bar remained open, the leather uncreased, waiting. The air conditioning brushed lightly against Marcus's neck, cool and controlled, nothing like the late summer heat outside that still clung faintly to his jacket. He stepped forward anyway, not past her, but closer, just enough to stand fully in the light. The glow caught the edges of his face, the quiet steadiness in his eyes. "I don't mind waiting," he said. Another pause. This one stretched. The hostess's smile flickered, just a fraction, before returning, thinner now. Behind her, a server slowed mid-step, attention shifting without turning his head. Conversations around them dipped for a breath, then resumed, but softer, like the room itself was listening without admitting it. The hostess glanced down at her screen, fingers tapping quickly, though nothing changed. Marcus followed the motion, noticing how her shoulders tightened, how her jaw set just slightly. "It'll be a long wait," she added. Marcus's hand slipped from the door handle, falling naturally to his side. He looked at his watch, not hurried, not impatient, just present. The second hand moved steadily, indifferent to everything happening in the room. "That's all right," he replied. Another beat. Then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted in the air between them. The kind of shift you don't hear, only feel. Behind the hostess, a man in a tailored gray jacket stepped closer, drawn by something he couldn't quite name yet. Marcus noticed him without turning. Not the man, just the change in pressure, the subtle tightening of space. The hostess inhaled, steadying herself, then leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice just enough to sound polite while keeping the boundary firm. "Sir, I really don't think tonight is going to work." Marcus didn't move, didn't argue, didn't react the way she expected. Instead, he gave a small nod, like he'd just confirmed a detail in a larger picture only he could see. The lighting above them hummed softly, a faint electrical whisper. Somewhere behind the bar, ice dropped into a glass with a sharp, clean crack. Marcus exhaled slowly, not frustrated, measured. His gaze drifted once more across the room, tracing the lines of a place he knew better than anyone here realized. The layout, the spacing, the rhythm of movement between tables. Everything exactly as it had been designed, exactly as it had been intended. And yet something was off. Not in the furniture, not in the lighting, in the people. He turned his attention back to the hostess, his expression unchanged, calm in a way that made it difficult to read. "I understand," he said quietly. But he didn't leave. Not yet. His fingers brushed lightly against his watch again, feeling the subtle vibration of time moving forward. Not rushed, not delayed, just inevitable. And somewhere, deep beneath the polished surface of the room, something unseen had already begun to shift. Marcus did not step away from the host's stand, not immediately, not even after the quiet dismissal settled between them like something final. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, the polished floor cool beneath his shoes, and let his gaze move again through the room, slower this time, more deliberate. There was a rhythm to the place, a pattern in how people moved, how trays passed from kitchen to table, how laughter rose and fell in small, controlled waves. He recognized it all, not just the design, but the intention behind it. Every inch of this space had once existed in sketches, in numbers, in long nights where the only light came from a desk lamp and a vision that refused to let go. He remembered measuring distances in feet and inches, calculating how far a server should walk between tables before fatigue set in, deciding where the lighting should soften and where it should sharpen just enough to highlight the grain of the wood. This was not just a restaurant. It was a system, and right now, that system was telling him something was wrong. The hostess cleared her throat gently, a subtle cue meant to move him along without saying it directly. "Sir, if you would like, I can recommend somewhere nearby," she offered, her tone still smooth, still controlled, but now edged with impatience that flickered just beneath the surface. Marcus turned his attention back to her, not with irritation, not with challenge, just with a quiet steadiness that made the space between them feel smaller than it was. "I appreciate that," he said, his voice even measured. "But I would prefer to dine here." Another pause, this one longer, the kind that stretched just enough to make the air feel heavier. Behind the hostess, the man in the gray jacket stepped fully into view now. Ethan Cole, the manager. His presence carried a different weight than the others in the room, not louder, not aggressive, but controlled in a way that suggested authority without needing to announce it. His suit was tailored precisely, his posture straight, his expression neutral in the way of someone who believed he understood every situation before it unfolded. He approached with unhurried steps, each one deliberate, each one reinforcing the sense that he was the one who set the tone here. "Is there a problem?" Ethan asked, his voice calm, professional, carrying just enough volume to be heard without drawing attention. The hostess straightened slightly. "No problem," she replied quickly. "Just a guest without a reservation." Ethan's eyes moved to Marcus then, taking him in with a glance that was quick but thorough, the kind that categorized without asking questions. Marcus met that look without flinching, his expression unchanged, his shoulders relaxed. Ethan offered a small, practiced smile, the kind designed to resolve situations efficiently. "I am afraid we are fully booked tonight," he said, his tone polite but firm, the finality already built into the words. Marcus nodded once, as if acknowledging the statement rather than accepting it. "I can see the room," he replied quietly. "There are open tables." Ethan's smile held, but it tightened just slightly at the corners. "Those tables are reserved," he said. "We maintain a certain standard for our guests." The phrase hung there for a moment, subtle, but not invisible. Marcus's gaze shifted briefly toward one of the empty tables, then back to Ethan. The lighting caught the edge of his watch again as his wrist turned, the second hand continuing its steady path forward. "And what standard is that?" Marcus asked, not confrontational, just curious, the question placed carefully, like something meant to reveal rather than challenge. Ethan exhaled lightly through his nose, a controlled breath, as if recalibrating. "A standard of experience," he answered. "We want to ensure that every guest feels comfortable." Marcus's eyes did not leave his. "Comfortable," he repeated softly. The words settled differently. The second time. Around them, the restaurant continued its quiet performance. Silverware clinked gently against porcelain. A server passed by carrying a tray of drinks, the glasses catching the warm light like small reflections of fire. Somewhere near the back, a low laugh rose, then faded. Everything looked the same. Everything sounded the same. But the space between Marcus and Ethan had shifted again, tightened, focused. Marcus took a slow breath, the scent of rosemary and citrus still lingering in the air, familiar in a way that felt almost personal. He let it out just as slowly. "I see," he said. And then, almost imperceptibly, his fingers brushed the edge of his phone in his pocket, not pulling it out, not making a move, just confirming its presence, like a quiet step in a process already in motion. Ethan inclined his head slightly, as if the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. "Thank you for understanding," he said. But Marcus did not move. Not yet. His eyes drifted once more across the room, over the tables, the guests, the staff moving in practiced lines. And beneath the polished surface, the same quiet realization settled deeper. This place was functioning, but it was not working the way it was meant to. And the longer he stood there, the clearer that became. The second hand on Marcus Reed's watch slid forward with quiet precision, each movement steady, unbothered, indifferent to the subtle tension gathering around him. He did not rush. He did not shift his stance. Instead, he remained exactly where he was, just inside the doorway, where the warm amber light met the faint cool draft from outside, standing in that thin line between belonging and being denied. Ethan Cole watched him now with a different kind of attention, less casual, more calculated, as though Marcus had become something that required resolution rather than dismissal. "Sir," Ethan said again, his tone still controlled, still professional, but now carrying a sharper edge beneath the polish. "I am going to have to ask you to step outside if you are not dining with us tonight." The words were careful, but the intention behind them was not. Marcus let the sentence settle. He tilted his head slightly, not in confusion, but in acknowledgement, as if Ethan had just confirmed another detail in a pattern Marcus was already tracing. His eyes moved briefly past Ethan, catching a moment near the bar where a couple had just been seated without hesitation. No reservation mentioned, no delay, just a quiet welcome and the pull of a chair. Marcus noticed the ease of it, the absence of scrutiny, the difference. He returned his gaze to Ethan, steady and calm. "I am trying to dine here," Marcus replied, his voice even, unraised, but carrying a weight that did not need volume to be felt. Ethan's jaw tightened just slightly, a subtle shift that only showed if someone was paying attention closely. "And I have explained that we cannot accommodate you," he said. "We have standards we are required to maintain." The word standards landed again, heavier this time, not hidden, not softened. Around them, the movement of the restaurant adjusted in quiet ways. A server slowed near the corner of a table, pretending to adjust silverware while listening. The hostess kept her eyes on her screen, but her fingers had stopped moving entirely. Even the ambient music, soft and instrumental, seemed to recede just enough for the silence between the words to become more noticeable. Marcus took a slow breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, carrying with it the scent of the kitchen, the familiar notes of a place he had built from nothing but vision and persistence. For a brief moment, something flickered behind his calm exterior, not anger, not frustration, but something closer to recognition. Recognition of a problem that was deeper than a single conversation. His hand moved again, this time slipping into his jacket pocket with quiet intention. Ethan's eyes followed the motion immediately, alert now, prepared, as though expecting escalation. But Marcus did not pull anything out yet. He simply rested his hand there, fingers brushing against the smooth edge of his phone, grounding himself in the moment. "Let me ask you something," Marcus said, his tone still measured, still composed, but now carrying a quiet clarity that cut through the surface of politeness. Ethan did not respond immediately. He gave a small nod instead, signaling that he was listening, though his posture remained firm, guarded. "If I were already seated," Marcus continued, "if I had walked in 5 minutes earlier, sat down at one of those tables, and ordered a meal, would there be a problem?" The question hung in the air, simple on the surface, but layered underneath. Ethan's expression did not change right away. He held Marcus's gaze, evaluating, calculating the answer that would maintain control of the situation. "That is not the situation we are in," Ethan replied finally, deflecting without directly answering. Marcus gave a slight nod, as though that response had been expected. "No," he said quietly, "it is not." Another second passed. Then another. The second hand on his watch moved again. Marcus shifted his weight just slightly, enough to turn his body a fraction toward the door, as if considering leaving. The movement caused a subtle release of tension in the space, a collective assumption that the situation was resolving itself. The hostess exhaled softly. The server near the corner resumed walking. Even Ethan's shoulders lowered just a fraction. But Marcus did not step out. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up in his hand, casting a faint glow across his fingers. The motion was calm, deliberate, without urgency. He glanced down at it for a brief moment, then raised it to his ear. The shift was immediate. The room did not stop, but it leaned. Conversations continued, but quieter. Movements continued, but slower. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in aggression, but in focus, as though trying to anticipate what would happen next. Marcus did not look at him now. His gaze was forward, distant, fixed somewhere beyond the room, beyond the moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady, controlled, carrying just enough to be heard by those closest without drawing attention from the entire room. "It is me," he said. A pause. "Yes, I am inside." Another pause, longer this time. The faintest shift in his expression, not a smile, not satisfaction, just confirmation. "Bring everything," Marcus added. "Now." He lowered the phone slowly, the screen dimming as it slipped back into his hand. The silence that followed was not loud, but it was present, like something invisible settling into place. Marcus lifted his wrist again, glancing at his watch for a fraction of a second. The second hand continued its steady path forward. And for the first time since he had walked through the door, Marcus Reed allowed himself to step back, just one step, turning slightly toward the exit, not in defeat, not in retreat, but in preparation for what was coming next. The glass door closed behind Marcus with a soft click, the kind that barely registered to anyone inside, yet marked a clear separation between two worlds that had just collided. Outside, the evening air felt different, cooler, carrying a faint trace of asphalt still warm from the day and a distant hum of passing traffic that stretched down the block. The restaurant's golden light spilled through the windows behind him, turning the glass into a mirror for a moment. Marcus caught his reflection there, steady, composed, unchanged. His shoulders relaxed slightly, not out of defeat, but out of control. He slipped one hand into his coat pocket again, feeling the familiar outline of his phone, then let it rest there as he stepped a few feet to the side, just beyond the direct line of the entrance. He did not leave. He did not pace. He simply stood, positioned where he could still see everything through the glass without being in the way. Inside, the rhythm resumed, but not entirely. Something had shifted, subtle but undeniable. The hostess leaned closer to Ethan, her voice low, quick, her eyes flicking toward the door where Marcus had been moments ago. Ethan listened without looking at her, his gaze fixed forward, as if replaying the last few minutes in his head, searching for something he might have missed. His jaw tightened once, then released. He adjusted his cuff slightly, a small gesture that restored his sense of control, or at least the appearance of it. A server passed by him, hesitating for a fraction of a second before continuing on, the tray in her hands trembling just enough to catch the light differently. At the bar, one of the empty seats was finally taken, a man sliding onto the stool with ease, greeted immediately, welcomed without question. The contrast remained, quiet but sharp. Marcus watched all of it without expression. His eyes moved from one detail to the next, not rushed, not searching, just observing. The system again. The patterns. The small inconsistencies that revealed something larger underneath. He glanced at his watch. The second hand continued its steady sweep. Time was moving exactly as it should. Nothing delayed. Nothing rushed. Just inevitable. A car passed by slowly on the street, its headlights cutting briefly across the restaurant windows, washing the interior in a flash of white before the warm tones returned. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, the fabric of his coat brushing softly against his arm. He tilted his head just enough to listen past the glass, catching fragments of sound. A laugh. The scrape of a chair. The low murmur of conversation. It all sounded normal. It all looked normal. But normal was not the same as right. Inside, Ethan took a step back from the host's stand, his posture resetting into something more rigid, more authoritative. He said something to the hostess that made her nod quickly, her fingers returning to the screen in front of her, though her movements were still not as fluid as before. Another staff member approached briefly, spoke in hushed tones, then stepped away just as quickly. The flow was there, but it was no longer effortless. Marcus noticed the difference immediately. Small disruptions. Microfractures in a system that relied on precision. He let his gaze drift upward, taking in the signage, the name etched above the entrance, the branding he had approved down to the exact shade and spacing of each letter. For a moment, something deeper settled in his chest, not regret, not disappointment, but a quiet acknowledgement. He had trusted the structure. He had trusted the people placed within it. And now he was seeing the gap between design and execution in real time. His phone remained silent in his pocket, but he knew that would not last. The call had been simple, clear, direct. There would be no delay on the other end. He knew that because he had built that part of the system himself. Reliability, response time, accountability, things that did not bend depending on who was standing at the door. A faint breeze moved down the sidewalk, lifting the edge of his coat slightly before settling again. Marcus took another breath, deeper this time, letting the air fill his lungs fully, grounding himself in the moment. He was not angry. That was the surprising part. Not even frustrated. What he felt was something else entirely. Clarity. The kind that comes when something you suspected becomes undeniable. Inside, Ethan's eyes flicked toward the door for the first time since Marcus had stepped outside. Just a quick glance. But it lingered half a second longer than it should have. He was thinking now, replaying, questioning. Not enough to change anything yet, but enough to feel the shift. Marcus met that glance through the glass, without moving. No signal, no reaction, just presence. Then Ethan looked away, returning to the controlled environment he believed he still commanded. Marcus checked his watch again. The seconds continued. 1, 2, 3, each one carrying weight now, building towards something that had already been set in motion. He adjusted his stance slightly, aligning himself with the entrance once more, not blocking it, just positioned where he would be seen the moment the door opened again. The street remained calm, the night settling in around him. And then, faint at first, but unmistakable, the sound of a car pulling up slowed near the curb, its engine quiet, deliberate. Marcus did not turn immediately. He did not need to. The timing was exact. He allowed himself one more breath, steady, controlled, before shifting his gaze slightly toward the approaching vehicle, knowing without question that everything inside that restaurant was about to change. The car came to a smooth stop at the curb, its engine settling into silence with a quiet precision that matched the rhythm Marcus had been tracking in his mind. The headlights dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of the restaurant reflecting across the polished surface of the vehicle. Marcus did not rush toward it. He remained where he was, grounded, composed, allowing the moment to unfold at its natural pace. The driver's side door opened first, followed by the rear, and a man stepped out holding a slim leather portfolio pressed neatly against his side. His posture was upright, efficient, his movements deliberate in the way of someone accustomed to being called only when things mattered. He adjusted his glasses briefly, scanned the entrance, and then his eyes found Marcus without hesitation. There was no confusion, no question, just recognition. He walked over with measured steps, stopping a respectful distance away. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice low but clear. Marcus gave a small nod in acknowledgement, nothing more. "You brought everything?" Marcus asked. The man lifted the portfolio slightly. "All documentation is here. Ownership filings, transfer confirmations, and operational authority records. Everything is current and verified." Marcus's eyes moved briefly to the folder, then back to the restaurant. Through the glass, the interior still held its polished illusion of control, but the subtle fractures were more visible now. Ethan stood near the host's stand, speaking with another staff member, though his attention flickered toward the door more frequently than before. He was waiting for something he could not define. Marcus extended his hand slightly, and the man passed the portfolio to him without hesitation. The leather felt cool and firm under Marcus's fingers, familiar in a way that went beyond the material itself. This was not just paperwork. This was proof. Quiet, undeniable proof. Marcus did not open it immediately. He let it rest in his hand, feeling its weight, understanding what it represented in this exact moment. The man beside him remained still, professional, saying nothing more unless asked. A few feet away, a passing car slowed briefly, then continued on, its tires brushing lightly against the pavement. The night moved forward, indifferent to what was about to happen. Marcus finally shifted his stance, turning slightly toward the entrance again. The restaurant's glass door reflected him once more, but now there was something different in that reflection. Not anger. Not tension. Certainty. He took a step forward, then another, closing the short distance to the door. The man who had arrived with him followed half a step behind, maintaining that same respectful distance. Inside, The hostess looked up just as Marcus reached for the handle again. For a split second, confusion crossed her face, quickly replaced by recognition of the same man she had turned away only minutes earlier. Her posture stiffened. Ethan noticed the movement immediately and turned toward the entrance just as the door opened once more. The soft chime above the door sounded again, the same as before, but this time it carried a different weight. Conversations did not stop, but they dipped, just enough to acknowledge that something was not repeating itself the same way. Marcus stepped inside without hesitation, the warm air meeting him again, the scent of the kitchen wrapping around him in familiarity. He did not look at the hostess this time. His gaze moved directly to Ethan. The man beside him remained quiet, standing just slightly to the side, holding his position like a silent extension of the moment. Ethan's expression shifted almost immediately. Not dramatically, but enough. His eyes moved from Marcus to the portfolio in his hand, then briefly to the man accompanying him, and back again. Something clicked into place behind his composed exterior, not fully formed, but enough to create a fracture in his certainty. "Sir," Ethan began, his tone still controlled, but no longer entirely steady. "I believe I already explained." Marcus raised the portfolio slightly, not aggressively, not abruptly, just enough to interrupt without raising his voice. The movement alone was enough to stop the sentence before it finished. The room did not freeze, but it leaned again, just as it had before, only now with more attention, more awareness. Marcus opened the portfolio slowly, the soft sound of leather shifting barely audible, and turned it just enough for Ethan to see the top page. He did not push it forward. He did not force it into Ethan's space. He simply held it there, steady, clear, undeniable. The lighting caught the edge of the document, illuminating the printed name. The signatures, the official markings that left no room for interpretation. Ethan's eyes dropped to the page, scanning quickly at first, then again, slower this time, as if needing to confirm what he was seeing. His posture changed, just slightly, but enough to be noticed by anyone paying attention. The hostess's fingers froze above her screen. A server nearby stopped mid-step, tray balanced carefully in her hands. Marcus remained still, his grip on the portfolio relaxed but firm. He did not speak yet. He did not need to. The proof was already doing the work. And in that quiet space between recognition and response, the balance of the room began to shift. The silence did not arrive all at once. It spread slowly, like something seeping through the edges of the room, touching one table, then another, until even the smallest movements began to feel heavier. Ethan Cole did not look up immediately after reading the document. His eyes remained fixed on the page, scanning the name again, the signatures, the legal seal pressed cleanly into the corner. Marcus Reed. The name settled differently now, no longer just a stranger at the door, but something anchored, something official, something that could not be dismissed or redirected. Ethan's fingers twitched slightly at his side, a small break in his otherwise controlled posture. He lifted his gaze slowly, meeting Marcus's eyes again, but this time the look was not the same. The certainty that had defined him moments ago was no longer intact. It had been replaced with something quieter, something more uncertain, like a calculation that no longer produced the expected result. Around them, the restaurant continued to exist, but not quite as before. A server near the bar lowered her tray onto the counter more carefully than necessary, the soft clink of glass against wood carrying further than it should have. The hostess stood still, her screen forgotten, her posture caught somewhere between attention and hesitation. Even the guests, though still seated, seemed to sense the shift, their conversations dipping in volume, their glances lingering just a fraction longer than usual. Marcus did not move. He did not press the document forward. He did not raise his voice. He simply held the portfolio open, steady, allowing the truth inside it to occupy the space between them. His breathing remained even, measured, the rise and fall of his chest barely noticeable beneath the structure of his coat. He had not come here to create a scene. He had come to see. And now he had seen enough. Ethan cleared his throat quietly, the sound controlled but unavoidable. "There must be some kind of misunderstanding," he said, though the words did not carry the same confidence they once would have. They felt lighter now, less anchored. Marcus's expression did not change. "There is not," he replied, his voice calm, direct, without tension. The simplicity of the response left no room for interpretation. Ethan's eyes flickered again to the document, then back to Marcus, as if searching for something that might contradict what he was seeing. But there was nothing there. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just clarity. A long second passed. Then another. The second hand on Marcus's watch moved forward again, quiet, steady, marking time without regard for the weight of the moment. Ethan straightened slightly, attempting to reclaim some measure of control, but the movement felt incomplete, like a gesture that no longer matched the reality of the situation. "If you would like, we can discuss this privately," he said, lowering his voice, shifting his stance just enough to suggest discretion. Marcus closed the portfolio slowly, the soft sound of leather folding back into place breaking the stillness just enough to draw every nearby eye. He held it at his side now, no longer needing to display its contents. The proof had already done its work. He looked at Ethan, not with anger, not with accusation, but with something far more difficult to ignore. Understanding. "We are already discussing it," Marcus said. His tone remained even, but there was a quiet weight behind the words now, something that settled deeper than volume ever could. Ethan's mouth opened slightly, then closed again, as if the response he had prepared no longer applied. The balance of the room continued to shift, subtle but undeniable. A couple near the window stopped mid-conversation, their attention drifting toward the host stand. The bartender paused for a fraction of a second, towel in hand, before continuing his motion more slowly. Marcus let his gaze move across the room one more time, taking in every detail, every small movement, every person who had participated in the system he had just witnessed. Not with judgment. Not yet. Just with clarity. He turned his attention back to Ethan, his posture unchanged, his presence steady. "I walked in as a guest," Marcus said quietly, "and I was told I did not meet your standard." The words hung in the air, not sharp, not loud, but impossible to ignore. Ethan did not respond immediately. He could not. The statement did not invite argument. It did not require explanation. It simply existed, grounded in the moment they had all just experienced. Marcus's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the portfolio, not out of tension, but out of resolve. The decision forming within him was not sudden. It had been building from the moment he stepped through the door. Now it was simply clear. The room waited, whether it realized it or not. And in that quiet space, where the illusion of control had already begun to crack, Marcus Reed prepared to say what came next. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He did not need to. The weight of the moment had already settled into every corner of the room, pressing gently but firmly against the polished surfaces, the quiet conversations, the carefully constructed sense of order that no longer held the same shape. Ethan Cole stood across from him, shoulders squared but no longer steady, his breath measured in a way that suggested effort rather than control. The space between them felt narrower now, not physically, but in what it allowed to exist unspoken. Marcus lifted his chin slightly, not as a gesture of authority, but as a quiet alignment of thought and action. "You said you maintain a standard," he continued, his tone even, each word placed with intention, not force. Ethan swallowed, the movement subtle but visible. He nodded once, almost reflexively, as though the statement still belonged to him. Marcus watched that nod, then let his gaze drift briefly to the staff behind the host's stand, the servers, the small cluster of people who had participated, who had watched, who had allowed the moment to unfold without question. Not one of them had intervened. Not one of them had paused to reconsider. The system had worked exactly as it had been practiced. And that was the problem. Marcus looked back at Ethan. "Standards are not about who you recognize," he said quietly. "They are about how you treat the person standing in front of you." The words did not echo. They did not need to. They settled into the space like something permanent. Ethan's eyes dropped for a fraction of a second, then lifted again, but the shift was enough. The confidence he had carried earlier was gone now, replaced by something heavier, something closer to realization. Behind him, the hostess shifted her weight, her fingers curling slightly against the edge of the stand, as if unsure where to place them. A server near the bar stopped completely now, her attention no longer disguised. The restaurant had not stopped, but it was no longer pretending not to notice. Marcus took a slow breath. The scent of the room still familiar, still unchanged. even as everything else had begun to move. He adjusted the portfolio in his hand slightly, not as a display, but as a reminder, a quiet anchor to the reality that had already been established. I did not come here to be recognized, Marcus continued. I came here to see if this place reflects what it was built to be. Ethan's lips parted slightly, as if preparing to respond, but no words came. There was nothing to defend in what had just happened, nothing to reinterpret. It had been clear. It had been immediate. And now it was undeniable. Marcus's eyes moved once more across the room, taking in the faces, the posture, the small shifts in behavior that revealed more than any statement could. A couple near the window looked down at their plates, suddenly aware of something they had not noticed before. The bartender wiped the same section of the counter twice without realizing it. The illusion of normal had fractured, and everyone could feel it, even if they could not name it. Marcus turned his attention back to Ethan, his expression unchanged, calm, grounded, unwavering. You enforced that standard tonight, he said, and you did it consistently. The statement was not praise. It was something else entirely. Ethan's brow tightened slightly, confusion mixing with the weight of realization. I was following policy, he said, the words quieter now, less certain, as though he was hearing them for the first time himself. Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the response without accepting it as explanation. Exactly, he said. A brief silence followed, the kind that does not demand to be filled. Marcus let it remain, allowing the truth of the moment to settle fully, to reach every person who had been part of it. Then, without raising his voice, without changing his posture, he spoke again, each word clear, deliberate, final. And that policy ends tonight. The sentence did not land with force, but it carried something heavier than volume. It carried decision. The room reacted not with sound, but with stillness. Ethan's shoulders dropped slightly, the structure of his stance loosening in a way that could not be hidden. The hostess's breath caught, barely audible. Somewhere in the room, a glass was set down more carefully than necessary, the soft contact marking the shift more clearly than any announcement could. Marcus did not move. He did not look away. He held the space exactly as it was, allowing the meaning of his words to unfold in real time. This was not about anger. It was not about reaction. It was about alignment. The system had revealed itself, and now it would be changed. The words did not echo, but they did not need to. They settled into the room with a quiet finality that no one could ignore, like a door closing somewhere deep beneath the surface of everything that had just unfolded. Marcus remained still after speaking, his posture unchanged, his presence steady, giving the moment space to breathe, to expand, to reach every person standing within it. Ethan Cole stood frozen for a fraction longer than anyone would have expected from a man who had carried himself with such certainty only minutes before. His mouth opened, slightly, then closed again, as if the language he relied on had suddenly become insufficient. His eyes moved, not just to Marcus, but around the room, catching the faces of his staff, the subtle shifts in their posture, the realization beginning to ripple outward. The authority he believed he held had not been taken from him in a loud or forceful way. It had simply dissolved. Sir, Ethan began, but the words faltered before they could take shape. Marcus did not interrupt. He did not press. He simply watched, calm, composed, allowing Ethan to face the weight of the moment without interference. The hostess shifted again, her shoulders drawing inward slightly, her earlier confidence replaced by something uncertain, something reflective. One of the servers stepped back half a pace, the tray in her hands now resting against the edge of a table, forgotten. The room had not stopped, but it had changed. It was no longer operating under the same assumptions. Marcus took a slow breath, then another, the rhythm of it steady, controlled, grounding the space around him. When he spoke again, his voice carried the same calm clarity, but now there was something else beneath it, something quieter, more deliberate. This is not about punishment, he said. The statement landed differently than anything before it. It shifted the direction of the moment, reframing it, removing any expectation of anger or retaliation. Ethan looked at him again, confusion mixing with something deeper, something closer to understanding. Marcus's gaze moved briefly to the staff, then back to Ethan. It is about responsibility, he continued. You made a decision tonight. Not just you. All of you. The words extended beyond Ethan now, reaching the people who had stood nearby, who had watched, who had participated through silence or agreement. The weight of that inclusion settled visibly. The hostess lowered her eyes. The server near the bar straightened slightly, as if bracing for something she could not yet name. Marcus adjusted his grip on the portfolio again, the leather shifting softly under his fingers, a quiet reminder of the authority he carried, though he did not use it to dominate the space. This place was built on a simple idea, Marcus said. Every person who walks through that door is treated with respect, not based on how they look, not based on what you assume, based on who they are the moment they arrive. Ethan's shoulders lowered further, the structure of his stance no longer able to hold the same shape. I understand, he said quietly, though the words carried more uncertainty than conviction. Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the effort, but not mistaking it for completion. Understanding is not enough, Marcus replied. It has to change what you do. A silence followed, deeper now, more grounded. The kind that invites reflection rather than reaction. Marcus let it remain, giving the moment time to settle fully. Then he shifted his weight slightly, not stepping forward, not stepping back, simply aligning himself with the space as it now existed. Tonight showed me exactly where this place stands, he said, and it is not where it needs to be. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, the movement small but revealing. There was no argument left, no justification, only the reality of what had happened. Marcus looked at him steadily, not with judgment, but with clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. So here is what is going to happen, Marcus said, his tone still calm, still controlled, but now carrying a quiet authority that filled the room more completely than anything before. The staff straightened almost instinctively, their attention sharpening, their posture adjusting in response to the shift. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to recede further, as though the space itself was listening. Marcus paused for a brief second, not for effect, but to ensure that every word that followed would land exactly where it needed to. His gaze moved once more across the room, taking in every face, every person who had been part of the moment, ensuring that what came next would not be missed. Then he returned his focus to Ethan, steady, unwavering. The decision had already been made. Now it was simply being spoken into existence. Marcus did not raise the portfolio again. He did not need to. The decision had already taken form long before the words were spoken, and now it moved through the room with a quiet certainty that no one could resist. He stood there, steady, grounded, his presence no longer questioned, no longer filtered through assumptions or hesitation. The air felt different, heavier but clearer, like something that had been hidden was now fully visible to everyone standing within it. Ethan Cole remained still, his posture no longer held together by confidence, but by the effort to remain composed. His hands, once controlled at his sides, now rested uncertainly, as if they no longer knew where they belonged. His eyes met Marcus's again, but this time there was no authority left in them, only the recognition of a line that had already been crossed. Marcus took a slow breath, the sound barely audible, but enough to anchor the silence that followed. Then he spoke, his voice calm, deliberate, each word carrying weight without force. Effective immediately, he said, your employment here is terminated. The sentence did not echo, but it moved through the space like a quiet current, touching every person who had been part of the moment. Ethan's shoulders dropped, not dramatically, but enough to show the shift. The structure that had held him moments ago was gone. He did not argue. He did not protest. He simply stood there, absorbing the reality of what had just been said. Marcus's gaze did not harden. It did not turn away. It remained steady, not as punishment, but as acknowledgement. Then his eyes moved beyond Ethan, extending to the others. The hostess, the servers, the staff who had stood in that same space, who had participated, who had allowed the moment to unfold without question. The same applies to anyone who chose to enforce that standard tonight, Marcus continued. His tone did not change. It remained even, controlled, but the meaning was unmistakable. A subtle shift moved through the staff, not loud, not chaotic, but visible in the way shoulders lowered, in the way eyes dropped, in the way hands became still. No one spoke. No one moved to interrupt. The decision had already settled into place. Marcus let the silence remain, allowing the weight of his words to fully reach them, to settle beyond the surface, into something deeper. Then, after a brief pause, his voice softened slightly, not in weakness, but in clarity. "This is not about removing people," he said. "It is about removing what does not belong here." The distinction landed differently. It reframed the moment, not as reaction, but as alignment. Marcus shifted his stance slightly, turning just enough to look across the room one final time. The tables, the lighting, the carefully designed space all remained exactly as they had been. But the energy within it had changed completely. The illusion was gone. What remained was something more honest, more exposed. He looked back at Ethan, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something quieter, something final. "You did your job the way you believed it should be done," Marcus said. "But that is not what this place stands for." Ethan nodded once, slowly, the movement small but genuine. There was nothing left to defend. Marcus gave a slight nod in return, acknowledging the moment without extending it further. Then he stepped past the host's stand, moving into the space fully now, not as a guest, not as an observer, but as the person who had built it. The man who had arrived with him remained just behind, silent, present, a steady confirmation of everything that had just been established. Marcus walked toward one of the empty tables, the same ones he had noticed earlier, the ones that had been labeled reserved. He reached the table and paused, his hand resting lightly against the back of the chair. The wood felt solid beneath his fingers, familiar, grounded. He pulled the chair out slowly, the sound soft against the floor, then sat down with calm precision. The room did not return to normal. Not immediately. The staff remained still for a moment longer, as if waiting for something else to happen, something louder, something more. But nothing came. Only Marcus, seated now, his posture relaxed, his presence steady, as though the storm had passed without ever needing to rise. He adjusted his watch slightly, the second hand continuing its quiet movement, unchanged by everything that had just occurred. Then he looked up, his voice calm, clear, carrying just enough to be heard. "Now," he said, "we begin again." The words settled into the space, not as an ending, but as something quieter, something stronger. A reset, a return to what should have been there all along. And for the first time that night, the silence that followed did not feel heavy. It felt right.